A Swift Kick in the Ass, episode 88.
All big changes start with a swift kick in the ass. Join the journey of lifelong friends, John Curren and Tom Stewart, as they make conventional thought bend over and take a boot to the keister. Warning, listeners may notice a force equal to or greater than needed to get your ass moving. A swift kick in the ass, living life on your terms.
Welcome, I'm Tom Stewart, and I'm joined with my lifelong childhood friend, John Curren. In today's episode, Before You Get to Enough is Enough. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks, Tom. You know, this is an interesting subject, isn't it? You know,
yes, it is.
How many times have you gotten to that point to where you're about to break and you just start thinking, enough is enough, man. I mean, things have got to change.
Absolutely. Usually it's involved with a job, but sometimes it's also life in general or relationships.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, I think this impacts all of us. Recently, I guess I've been reminded that just because you have a bad day, it is not a reminder that that you're having a bad life. You know, you could have a bad day, you could have a bad week, you could have a bad month, maybe even a bad couple of months. That doesn't mean that you have a bad life. It's a signal that you need to change things. I think the problem is sometimes we have a very low threshold for what we consider to be enough. So therefore, we decide to jump ship maybe, or make rash decisions and rash changes, which have a great impact, on our lives. And maybe we even regret it. One of the decisions that I actually regret happened to me, gosh, this is a long time ago, probably about 20 years ago. I was, I know I've talked about her before on this show, but, I was almost married once, and I went through a terrible breakup. I mean, we lived together. It was almost like going through a divorce. In fact, in the state of Georgia, it was considered to be almost a divorce because if you live together for a year, it was considered to be, not a legal marriage, but, a kind of what is that called, Tommy?
Like a binding agreement?
Yeah, like a binding agreement, almost like an informal marriage. But, anyhow, when I went through that, I really didn't. It was like my whole life had been thrown up in the air, and all the pieces were coming down at me. I just felt so overwhelmed. So I decided to throw myself into work because that's what I knew best. That's the one constant I had in my life was work. So I threw myself into work, and I really didn't address the issues that I was facing. I was going through an huge emotional upheaval in my life, and I failed to address that. And it led to some very poor decisions. One of those decisions was to quit my well-paying job and my good job and go mountain biking for about a year. The original intent was not to go mountain biking for a year and just to take a year off. It was to go into business with some friends. And I learned excuse me. I learned very early, that is a delicate mix of friendship and business. For you and me, Tommy, it works, but for these guys, it destroyed the friendship. I made a knee-jerk reaction. I decided to leave a good-paying job and put everything to the side because I wasn't facing up to the real issue.
So you took the leap without actually having a plan in place, right?
Yeah, we had a loose plan, but it was an unproven plan. That's for sure.
And
it was it was like an idea.
Did you have any runway, anything to keep you going in order to get that running?
Yeah, I mean, I had back then it was the Thrift savings plan. It was like the equivalent to the 401k. I had money set aside and I cashed it out. I paid a huge tax per, I lost like 50% of my money just in taxes. Like I said, it was a terrible, terrible decision. And in fact, it was one of the lowest points in my life. I have to say that I reached a point to where I lived only through the, goodness of friends, who would like, who had an extra room or a couch to stay on. It was, I had no money. I was being fed. I was being housed. Everything was just in total upheaval. I had no job. I had no income. It was terrible.
And
I
it's
never
good to hear
want to
that.
go through that again.
You hear that? It's good to hear that, John, because we hear a lot of these success stories on other podcasts and so forth about people making the leap from full-time work, and they make it. But the problem is we do not hear the stories about the people who do not make it. So you have to be careful when you make that leap. I think you do have to have a steady plan behind you, a solid base that you can fall back on.
More times often than not, a business is going to fail. You know that, so more than half the time, a business starting out is going to fail. That's just a statistic. But, my circumstance was also different at that time. I was not married. I didn't have any children that I knew of, still don't, I know of 3. The rest, there might be some in question, but anyhow, that's the subject for another day.
I hope your wife doesn't hear that.
I hope not either. It wouldn't surprise her though, I think, if she heard me say it. In any case, my life circumstance was different and I was open to taking risks. I'm not open to that anymore, and I think about, like my current job. I was placed in this role, my current role. I was placed in it because there was a job that needed to be done. It wasn't necessarily one of my choosing. But it was a job that needed to be done. And of course I'm a team player and I want to do a good job. And if the business has a need and they're paying me, of course I'm going to deliver value. But my heart isn't necessarily in that. And I know that it shows in my performance. I'm not proud of that either, but this is where kind of I am right now. I have not reached enough is enough with my current job. I don't expect to, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to push through. Just because we have difficulties, again, doesn't mean that those difficulties need to continue. I recognize that I'm my own, I'm driving some of my own difficulties. So I'm taking steps to change that. And it does require somewhat of a balance, right? When you have your feet in 2 worlds, such as like we have, Tommy, you're kind of on a you're kind of on a pivot, you're on a bouncing board, and you can feel like really way off kilter, one way or the other. And that does affect our decision making. When you're on a board and you're teetering and it can get very stressful. So what we want to try to do is stabilize that platform before you try to make any jumps.
I agree. That I'm planning for my long-term, not retirement, but this transition to maybe doing something else full-time that I really enjoy. So I set out that I probably have at least 5 years, and I'm sure more, probably 6 or 7, because depending when my son gets out of high school and then goes to college, it's really depending on what he does for college. But that's given me time. And I think of it, you could go back to school and become anything you want within that amount of time, practically almost a doctor with given 8 years, right? But that's not what I'm going to do. But I am learning. I am teaching myself. I am making steps towards that direction, but safe steps. I still have my job. I still have my career. And I have a plan, and I'm formulating a plan. I don't have everything, down to a science to how I would like to do it, but I'm working on it.
Yeah. So if you're trying to stabilize, the board that you're on and trying to get solid footing, a good thing that you can do is assess your surroundings, and what what that really means is, putting your world down onto paper, trying to describe your world, your circumstance. Doesn't have to be shared with anyone, but I find that the act of writing that down and kind of trying to define what you're up against can really help you formulate an action plan. And
Well,
I'll use an example.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying it does two things for you. It gives you focus, plus it gets it out of your head, and so it's not constantly circling around there and kind of adding stress to your life.
What I find on that note, when you have thoughts, when something's going on in your head, if you don't write it down, those thoughts just will bounce around your head. They don't leave. And what I find in my own life is that when they bounce around, it's like a pinball machine, or what was that? Wasn't there like a stand-up machine, like with a ball, and it was an Italian game when we were growing up?
Actually, I think it's Chinese.
Pincelli,
where they send all the little balls through, and
yeah.
It's like it's like a pinball, but like with 1,000 little balls.
Yeah, it was like an Italian pinball machine when we were growing up. Anyhow, it's these things just is so overwhelming. But so you want to stabilize it, and the best way to really do that is to figure out what you're up against. For me, when I was just up to my eyeballs in debt and just felt like I had this 1,000-pound gorilla on my back, I reached a point to where I did say enough is enough. And at that point, the first step I took was admitting to myself that I was my own worst enemy and that I was the solution to my problem. No one else was going to take action. I needed to just say enough is enough. I'm not going to live with this anymore, and I'm going to make changes in my life. That was the first step. The second step was then to really define the problem. And for me, it was my bills, and my creditors, and, people I owed, and money I owed. So I sat down and I wrote a list of everyone that I owed money to, and I started pulling together information related to that problem. So I had my creditor, I had the amount of money that I owed totally, and then I actually started like learning more about what I was up against. And what the first thing that I saw was that I have to not cuss here because this is a family show, but I really want to cuss when I think about interest rates and what we pay on credit cards. It was ridiculous. I realized very quickly that once I knew that interest rate, I knew that the math was against me. No matter what I did, if I continued to pay the minimum payment, I was never going to get out from under. I had to take drastic steps. And it wasn't until I sat down and I started listing out things and writing it down and really thinking about what I was up against and putting the pen to paper and realizing it made the decisions very easy once I knew what I was facing. And to me, I think that's also knowing the difference. I mean, that knowing the difference is part of all of this, is not only knowing what you're up against, but knowing that your world can be different. I didn't always have credit card debt. I knew what life was like before. So for me, knowing the two different worlds, I had a choice to make. And I chose to get the hell out of the hell I was in with the credit card debt. And, in about 2.5 years, we paid off over $90,000. It's taken us actually about 10 years, and we've paid off about $250,000, about $250,000. Your finances are dynamic. They're always changing. You're never going to be just static. There's always input and output. So that financial situation is it's easy to explain. It's easy to define. Our usual life problems are maybe not so easy to do. We might have some problems out there that maybe we're taking action on and we're not getting any traction. So,
It's
maybe you're
like
not taking the right action.
Kind of like in those old Tarzan movies we used to watch, John, where the Safari guy would always come, or Tarzan would all of a sudden fall into a pit of quicksand.
Oh, yeah.
You know how quicksand is. The more you
Right.
struggle, the quicker you go down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. You're taking action, and that action is it's important to take action, because let's just face it, a decision without action is just a thought. And we want to take action in our lives. That's the only way we have any possibility of making changes in our life. It's through taking action. But we need to make sure that the action we take is meaningful and is heading in the right direction.
So there's always that saying, work smart, not work hard. Because, hard work's important, but if you're doing the wrong things, it doesn't matter. I give you an example of this, John. I always talk about jujitsu because it's part of my life. But
Right.
we switched gyms here recently, and I've learned a lot of things that I'm doing wrong. And we have an open mat on Saturdays, which means you can come in and do whatever you want. Usually the guys come in and they just roll, which is wrestle. And I told myself, so I'm going to go to this every Saturday with my wife, Jen, and I'm not going to roll, because what that does is it's reinforcing all my bad habits that I've brought over with me, even though you think it's working hard. That's what, kind of formulates your jujitsu. What I need to do is drill the techniques that I'm learning and reinforce those, and then go back to class. And then when I roll at the end of the night or whatever, but it's working smart and actually approaching it as a science rather than just, I'm going to go out there and get a workout in. Yeah.
It's paying attention to what you're doing, really, and not just going through the motions.
Right.
And let's just face it, a lot of us just go through the motions in a lot of things. So it is taking that mindlessness out of it and putting thought into what you're doing. I was thinking about our high school band director, Mr. Parsons. God rest his soul.
Right.
He used to always say, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect.
He's absolutely right.
So, think about it. You keep practicing, you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same results. You have to change what you do if you want to get, results. Like, I've talked about like the clutter that I've accumulated throughout the years, especially the clutter I inherited from my dad when he died. I've been addressing that clutter for the last 4 or 5 years. And I've learned a lot about organizing things, especially tangible items, junk. I know how to take a huge pile of stuff and start sorting through it and start categorizing it, bucketing it, and getting it into larger groups, and then filter it down even more, and in the last 4 or 5 years, I've converted the things to cash that had value. I have thrown away the things that were meaningless. I've gone through this process of kind of simplifying my life and getting rid of the clutter. I still have a lot of clutter, but what I recognize is I've actually got to a point to where I needed to shift my actions and put it into something more tangible. A lot of the times we just go through the steps, and we're like, removing clutter from your life is great, but we're always going to have clutter. We're always going to have that activity. So we need to throw in other activities that will result in less clutter in our life, have the same result, but maybe taking a different approach to it. And I like it's a byproduct, the removal of clutter. It's like saying you want to lose weight and then going out and like going on a hike or hiking around Europe. You're going on travel, but you're going to be losing weight because you're exercising. You're out in the wilderness because you're hiking around Mount Blanc. You don't have a lot of food with you. It's a byproduct. You're getting in shape. You're enjoying your life. It's a benefit.
John, I know you've been doing this, and I just started doing it myself. Is I've got familiar with Facebook Marketplace, Let Go, and some of the other apps that are out there in order to get rid of some things that I have hanging around that I know they're valuable, but I'm not using them.
Yeah.
I think in my head, oh, I might use this in the future, but I'm like, you know what? If I really need it in the future, I'll buy another one. So I've been trying to get rid of the clutter and bring in some cash that, we need for other things. And I remember doing that with my comic book collection that I had since I was 4 years old. I carried this thing in boxes. When we were married, it took up every closet I had. And I got the grief from my wife for like, I have no room. I have no room to put my stuff. All this stuff in the closet's yours. And she was right. And one Christmas when I was down on my luck, I had lost my job, 5 or 6 years ago. And I went to the comic book store and I got like $300 for it. And it was well worth over $300. But it was something that, it got rid of the clutter for me. And that was worth it right there, is not to have my wife anymore go into the closet and be able to say that everything is mine. Now it's just filled with electronics instead of comic books. But so I'm starting to get rid of those.
So often, when we talk about getting things done, we often focus on the things that we do. But really, we need to take a step back and look at those things that we want to do and recognize, is this something that we, can control? Or are we working on something that we can control? Or are we working on something that we really have no control over? And maybe that's why we're just spinning our wheels here, is because it doesn't matter what we do. We're never going to be able to control this. We're never going to be able to get a grip on this because it's not within our control. It's like trying to get someone to change their behaviors, like a friend or a loved one. Maybe they, maybe they have a habit or they do something that you really just hate. You're never going to change them. You will never change them. All you can do is
it's hard
change
enough.
yourself.
It's hard enough to change yourself. And John, there's one underlying thing. I know we've talked about a lot of different tactics and techniques in order to change, but the overwhelming large picture, large scale idea is the mindset. And if you create that mindset of change and that environment of change, I know I do it with my wife. I'm trying different things. I've tried yoga with her. I try it in diet. It's not just a matter of, okay, here's this plan and I got to follow it rigidly. I say, I hear some overwhelming goals that I want to achieve. What do I have to do that? And I start making those changes all around my life. And I have my wife who's involved in the same process in her life. And we're constantly looking for a positive vibe so we can start to create those changes in our life. Not just a rigid, just do this technique, just do this tactics, because tactics end up failing. Sometimes they work, but if you have an arsenal of different things to throw in there, different tactics and techniques, but in the mindset to say, you could observe when you're slipping on what you want to change. It fosters an overall, environment of growth. Yeah.
It's funny. Back when my wife and I were, up to our eyeballs in debt, as you can imagine, we got into a lot of arguments about finances. And it really wasn't anything out of the ordinary. We both just wanted certain things in our life. We wanted certain things. I think no matter your standing in life, there are always things that we want. And what my wife was asking for, what I was asking for was not much, but given our situation, it just, was not good. But what I recognize, what I learned during that time is that when we determined what our goals were, and they were two simple goals. One was to have no debt, and the other was to have money in the bank. When we decided on those goals, and we just, we committed ourselves to them, the arguments actually went away, because when the problems came up and the discussions began about whether we should spend this money on this certain thing, it always came back to the two goals. And if it didn't contribute to those two goals, there was no argument, because it didn't contribute to the goals. And we had made a commitment to each other to say, we're going to reach this goal. So,
right. So you've created that environment and that mindset. Doesn't matter what tactic. There's plenty of ways to save money by not spending money or by earning more money, what have you, right?
Yeah. And there were times where there were some exceptions to where, even though it didn't contribute to the goal, we both decided that, yeah, this was important enough to override it. But again, it all boils down to choice. And it was a choice we made. And we recognized too that like say, for instance, moving into the house that we're currently in, which we actually have spent more time here than in our first house in Virginia. But our decision to move definitely derailed our financial plans. We actually, we sold at a time when the market was really down. So we got a good price on our new house, but we lost about $40,000 or $50,000 in equity in our old house because of the timing of the market. That was the first time I ever had to bring money to the closing table to sell a house, and to the closing table of the house that we're buying. It was not a good financial decision. It derailed us, but it was the right decision to make at that time, even though it went against our goals, because it's not all about the money. It's about your life.
The big picture.
Yeah. So, it's funny. I won't mention the name, but I was at a home improvement store yesterday, or about ready to go in. And as I open up my truck door, I look down and there was a quarter on the ground. And, I'm like, cool, money. I was happy. I picked it up and I looked at it. It was tails. It was tails up. And I'm kind of superstitious, I have to admit, I'm a little superstitious. And I thought, man, that's a crap load of bad luck I'm picking up. And I was like, I'm tossing it away. And as I'm tossing away, I'm thinking, dude, you just tossed away a quarter. The good luck principle only applies to pennies, And I started almost to consider going back to look for that quarter, okay, that I just tossed out. But as I did, I thought about it, and I thought about the simple action of throwing away that quarter and all that bad luck. I actually felt that inside.
You felt better. What I was really hoping this story would be, John, was that you were going to reach down and try to pick up that damn quarter, and it was super glued to the ground, because that would have bbeen karma from all the years that we did that in the Hollywood Mall and watched old people try to pick up quarters, and they would get like a file and a nail file, and they'd pull it out and they'd be like trying to scrape it off the ground. It's stuck on the ground.
That's hilarious. Oh my God. That's such a funny memory. But it's not about the money. These actions that we take, many times we take actions, it's not about the money. But when you really stop to think about it, it is about the money, isn't it? Because we need money to survive. And we have to make decisions based on a need for money. So, if you're not happy with your job, then you should explore other options to replace the money that job provides. But before you get to enough is enough, you really need to think long and hard about the decisions, because some actions that you take, you can't go back. And you're going to have to pay paid the price for that decision. So, there are a lot of things to consider. Again, before you get to enough is enough, think about, what got you there. Think about how you contribute to the problem. Start thinking about, what you can do better, and recognize that even though we don't always get to do things of our choosing, we do have choice in the matter. We can choose not to do it, but is that really in your best interest? Or is it in your best interest to make the best out of what was given to you and the opportunities that were presented to you, or the things that were presented to you that you didn't choose, but you're given and that you have to do, especially related to your job. Everything serves a purpose, but we can determine what that true purpose is and what it serves.
John, those sound like closing remarks to me. I think you've given people a lot to think about, a lot to action items for them to take action and try to make some change in their own life. So what do you say? Time to wrap this puppy up?
Yeah, I think that is the end. I just want to say a couple more things. Our lives are a delicate balance, and a lot of the times we start feeling shaky, especially when we get pulled by what we love to do or by what we want to do, as compared to what we need to do. There's a delicate balance, and we have to balance both of those things. We have to do both. We have to do things that we need to do, but we also should be doing things that we want to do and that we love to do. And it's up to us to find that balance. And I hope that what we talked about today will help a lot of people help strike their balance and help them take appropriate action and get, enough, not just enough out of life, but get all that they can.
Right. Well, what you're talking about, survival. You have to survive before you can move up in the hierarchy of needs. And that's a lot of...
I'm talking about thrival.
Right. Well, thriving, you have to thrive, but you have to survive before you can thrive. Right. And a lot of our show, with the whole series that we did on 48 Laws of Power, a lot of that was about surviving, in a hostile environment. So now is your time to thrive. So it's a delicate balance, but get out there and do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
so until next time.
Yeah, make sure you check out a Swift Kick in the Ass. That's swiftkickinass.com. We have John's Simple Spending Tool. Make sure you sign up for our free membership site, right, John? We have all kinds of cool stuff in there for them, little videos.
And also I want to take this opportunity to say that, we have some things in store for our listeners, and I think that you'll be very interested. So keep in touch, join our Facebook page, join the repository of all the tools that we have, and keep in touch.
Yeah, we really work hard to try to make our Facebook group or Facebook page full of good information and articles that you would like to share. So honestly, just take a stop by. It's, the Swift Kick in the Ass. We're the only one on the Facebook because we can't promote our page legally through them because they don't like our name. So help us out. Go there, like the page, share it with your friends. It's the only way we're going to expand that group. Yeah.
And thanks to Carol, our super fan.
Yep, absolutely. Peace out.
Thank you all so much. We'll talk to you all as soon as we can.
Next time.
Bye.
Later.